All right, we're live. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, wherever you are in the world. Happy Tuesday here in the United States. My name is Peter Hill, Coach Peter Hill, international career coach and co host of Breaking Bad Careers. We run Breaking Bad Career live roughly every 2 weeks, sometimes it's every 3 weeks. At least once a month, to be honest. It's basically whenever we feel inspired to share a message and whenever we find a wonderful guest to join us, just like today. A little bit about myself, Coach Peter Hill, international career coach. I've been doing this type of work for a little over 20 years and been really blessed and psyched to be able to work literally all over the world. So a little over a decade, even a little bit more than a decade in Asia, about 3 years in the UK, doing some programming there in London and as well as in other parts of Europe. And then more recently, I was on the mainland US in Boston and San Diego before returning back home to my hometown here in Honolulu, where I'm currently based and running a private career coaching practice. So that's a bit about myself, joined by, as always, by Coach Eli.
Hey, gents. Great to have everyone here. Thank you, James, for joining us. We have quite the show planned today. We're going to be discussing the oh so important topic of self-awareness and the impact that can have on your career, whether you're a job seeker or you are someone who is navigating their existing career and wants to have more meaningful conversations and build more meaningful relationships, right? I'm Coach Eli. I am a 5-time career changer, recovering management consultant, and now international career coach for the last 7 years, supporting thousands of individuals across hundreds of countries in landing meaningful career opportunities. Co-founder of Your Career Strategy, as well as a co-host of Breaking Bad Careers. Without further ado, we'd like to introduce our guest today, James Morrison, who's joining us all the way from Boston, Massachusetts, or maybe outside of Boston, Massachusetts. You can give us the specifics. And James, I'll let you self-introduce.
Super. Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Eli. It is just fantastic to be here. So you're right. Technically, I live just outside Boston, about 26 miles west, a little place called Southborough. So pretty sure nobody's ever heard of it. But it's a nice, quiet little suburb. They roll the pavements up around 7 p.m. and everybody, just shuts down for the evening. But I am thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this evening. You can tell from my accent, I'm not to the manor born, so I'm an Irish guy living in the US for about 20 years. So as a landing place, Boston isn't a bad place to come for an Irishman. I have probably, like Peter or like Eli, had multiple careers, over my lifespan so far. But in the last 15 years, almost, so much of that has been in career development in the higher ed space in a variety of different ways. So working from undergraduate to postgraduate students, to working with a private consulting company in terms of program design, and most recently with a little place in Boston called MIT, working with an exec ed population. And so much of my experience also, I think like both of you, also working mostly with international students. So that is a quick sort of intro from me. So where do we begin?
Well, how about if I kick things off by acknowledging a long-time relationship that you and I have had, James. You and I originally crossed paths. Oh my gosh, it was about 11 or 12 years ago.
Oh, I've lost
probably
a bit more now. Yeah, it's
Wow.
definitely a good decade plus.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that you guys had known each other for that long. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was quite serendipitous for sure. And it was, my background is a bit in higher education. So I was involved with Halt International Business School for about 9 years. And when I first got involved with the school on a consulting basis, actually, that's when I first met James. And James was running the career operation out of, you were in Boston at that time.
I was in Boston
if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so, as a nice segue to today's topic on learning and development, James was instrumental in helping me through the learning curve within a new type of organization in higher education. I had the subject matter expertise, but I was in a new environment, and James was instrumental in helping me navigate and learn, and go on to ideally make the impact that we all wanted to make within the school. So that's our background. But to further pivot into the topic itself, it is a broad topic. The word learning has come up a couple of times in our preparation conversations, and I thought I'd just start with a question for you, James, around, what is your definition of learning within the context of your career, within the context of careers in general? I think we know what learning means, but what does it mean to you in terms of career development?
The first word that comes to my mind when you say that is I go to a place of reflection, and really thinking about using that sort of, if I look back and I look at the context of my experiences, like, it's the study of all of that, those elements that have really driven my career, whether some of that is by design, whether some of that is by accident. But it's, to me, that the learning in all of that is paying attention to, the decisions that I made. Like, what were the factors behind all of that? Why did I choose to do something, or why did I not choose to do something? What propelled me forward, but equally what held me back as well too. And so you have this wonderful wraparound of learning in all of that. I mean, I could just pick one of those elements, and we could probably talk all night on one of those pieces.
That's pretty interesting. So this idea of reflection, right? I've been working with hundreds of people over the pandemic, and some of the things that have been coming up in those sessions, like, I don't make the time to reflect on these things after a long day at work. I'm just so exhausted. I'm feeling quite burnt out. So, I'll work from 9 till 6 or 8 till 6, and then I'll come home, and then from 6 till midnight, just kind of eat and veg out, and don't really have the energy to do this deeper reflection. Then the weekend comes, and I'm trying to keep myself occupied so I don't have to think about the week ahead, so I can decompress a little bit, to reserve and fill up my tank a little bit, so I can go into the next week where I'm just going to be getting depleted again. And it just seems like a vicious cycle that a majority of people are actively dealing with day in and day out. And I guess where I'm going with this is, how do you make the time for it? Or if people are struggling making the time, what are some easy hacks for them to start kind of taking inventory into this learning that they can do through reflection?
It's a great question, and I think it is something that everybody, or at least most people, struggle with, is taking the time to pause, to reflect on their career, to understand what has gotten them to where they are. And I think part of the inability, or the lack of being able to carve out that time, comes from, for most people, there isn't that immediate need. And it's only when that immediate need arises that that they're almost trying to force that particular function, or force that time. So it's not like they can do it systematically. So how do you do it? I guess like bite-sized pieces. I think it's really about creating like a habit or muscle memory to be very intentional about, I will give this 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just to stop and to pause and to think. There are any number of little exercises that you can do, which by themselves aren't time intensive. And I think that's, at least when I also work with people too, that's where I see some of the struggles, is they're looking to have like this almost immediate results. And that's just not career development. It is the sum of so many parts that really come together before you see or have that aha moment.
That makes a lot of sense. James, you mentioned that you actively take this learning approach. I'm just curious, how did maybe you could walk us through your own approach on how you had been doing this throughout your career, just so our audience can get a feel for how James Morrison handles it day in and day out, to get to the space that you're in today.
Trial and error would be part of the answer. Part of it is that I didn't in the early days. I didn't take the time. It was a question of just always being busy, always finding the need to do something and not being intentional about what was important for me. I was too busy looking at KPIs or metrics or tasks, or maybe trying to change something about the work that I was doing, more from whether it was a student engagement or trying to improve outcomes. But it was always about the work and not necessarily about me. And I myself have experienced my own burnout in all of that. And you get to a point where, you're hoping something changes, but that's like such a passive approach to take. Like, somebody else is going to solve that problem for you without you taking the time to actively do that. But in order to affect that change, then you yourself, it's got to start with you. Like what's wrong with this picture? What's not working, for you? Why? And that also requires huge honesty in all of this. So for me, it was really through bad experiences, and bad experiences can be helpful in the sense that it informs your learning. Bad experiences for me hopefully help me become a better manager in some ways, because it's not a scenario you'd like to replicate for others. But it was getting to a place where, one, I had confidence in myself as well. So did I know what was important to me? Like, if I was really honest, then to sort of to be able to speak all of that, to get to a place where I could speak up. And I don't want to say to hell with the consequences of all of that, because, if you're dependent on a paycheck, then that's obviously a very serious outcome. You don't want to jeopardize all of that. But part of it is to have enough faith in yourself that, worst case scenario, like you lost a job, then you will recover. And how are you going to do all of that? So for me, it was a huge learning journey of getting to a place where I now truly feel in charge of my career, that I know how to spot the telltale signs of when things are going wrong, when the environment is no longer right for me because either some element within the environment has changed or my own values themselves have changed. And so those values no longer align with the culture that I originally joined.
You use the word honesty, James, and I'm wondering what both of you guys think about this. Sometimes self-reflection, if we're using that parallel definition of learning, sometimes reflection can be uncomfortable. And so the word that comes to mind for me is vulnerability, right? And sometimes it takes courage to take that look in the mirror, because they're, depending on the individual, sometimes they're not necessarily excited to see what they see in that mirror. Even though we, the three of us know as coaches, as leadership and career coaches, that's one of the most important things we can do as individuals. For some people who are maybe green to this process, it can be uncomfortable. So do you think vulnerability is a thing within this conversation?
Absolutely. I was working with somebody there in recent weeks, and really thinking about, okay, the next career for this person and what is important to her. And the challenge for her was the expectation of doing X, taking her career to the next level of being a more senior manager. the truth is she didn't want to do it. She was much happier in a role that was much more of an individual contributor, and there's nothing wrong with that, and that's great. Like she that she was getting to the point where this is my sweet spot, this is what I want to do. But I think the vulnerability in this is the fear that you'll be judged for that okay, you've all of these accomplishments, so therefore the next obvious rung on your career ladder is this and a more senior role. So there's the vulnerability of I will be judged by others if I don't step up, that something's not right or I'm not good enough. And that is, it's a very real thing. I mean, I've seen that sort of manifest itself, in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
Eli, what about you? I'm sure you see this.
Yeah, I think vulnerability is certainly key, because I think it's tough to create change in one's life if your guard is up all the time, right? Because generally there's a certain type of, I guess, like with vulnerability comes a certain level of authenticity in how you're bringing your feelings forward and your emotions into the game, right? So when you say vulnerability, it could be in creating the space to face yourself and face the conditioning that you've had throughout the entirety of your life, from the time you are a young person until today, and say, wow, there's been a lot of factors there that have contributed to the reason why I think this way, act this way, show up this way, right? And then additionally, if we have that perspective, then we can also start to understand that others are also coming with a lot of baggage into the mix, right? So even like this level of vulnerability helps us when we're going into hard conversations at work as well, when we are experiencing this burnout, but we feel like, oh, well, we just got to keep doing everything the way we have been doing it. Well, if we can give ourselves a space to be vulnerable and maybe get vulnerable with our hiring manager or an individual that's on our team that may be giving us this added stress, then we can open up and be vulnerable about how we feel. And I think that in itself is extremely empowering, because it brings the guards down for both sides, and it almost reinfuses this aspect of, hey, we're both human and we're both here trying our best to show up, and I feel that I cannot because of X, Y, and Z, right? So regardless if you're doing the self-reflection or you're basically bringing things forward in your work environment, this idea of vulnerability promotes a certain level of authenticity that's required to really help you progress forward. So vulnerability, in my eyes, equals forward progress once you build up the courage to let the guard down a little bit, which can be hard for a lot of people because there's a reason the guard's up, right?
Of course. And it's particularly harder if that vulnerability or that fear exists in terms of if you're in some type of hierarchical structure. If that is if you're in a relationship with a manager and the inability to be able to give feedback or to be able to share like true concerns, like that's a power dynamic right there. And again, I think we've probably all worked with people to like, how do you approach that? How do you address that situation? How do you deal with that? And it's not just sort of bringing that up, but it's also, I've worked with people who themselves are managing people, and they themselves are also afraid to address that. They don't know how to, I guess, in some ways, level that playing field and make it. It's easy to say that this is a safe space, and I invite your comments and I invite your feedback. But you've got to really prove that and demonstrate that if you want to create that that space where you can have true honesty, or honest and vulnerable conversations.
So speaking of like organizational structures and organizational dynamics, when it comes to professional development within role, right? Clearly there's your manager, right? Your direct manager. And then there's the learning and development wing of human resources. Then there's yourself, right? And then there's the larger context, your peers and your colleagues and whatnot. So as career coaches, we'd be the first to advocate that, you need to take control of your own learning and not wait around for the context to be perfect or wait around for that next training program that the company's offering. So what have you seen works, right? Either in your own work or in your conversations with your clients, or, you're involved with the executive program at MIT Sloan. So what types of conversations do you see working when it comes to somebody managing their career? They're working in an organization, it could be large or small, but they really want to take control of things, and they don't want to sit back and wait for next fall or next spring when the next training program comes along.
A really great question. I'm trying to figure out the best way to answer that. It would almost depend on the situation. But I am with you. First and foremost, like true professional development has to start with yourself. You've got to take charge of the process, and it is something that I continually talk to people about all the time. Great, there may be opportunities within the company, through any L&D or through professional development conferences or whatever that would look like. But ultimately, I want people to take charge of their careers, and those are the conversations I have. What does that mean to them? Okay, great, you're in a job right now, but honestly, what's the next job after that? Look at this long term. And that's not the same as saying to somebody, you now need to start planning your exit strategy out of this role and into the next. But paying attention to what it is you want to do. How are you going to get there? To try and imagine what that sort of future world would look like, to try and think about what are those skills and abilities you might need, and then to do that, again, that self-reflection, that analysis, do I have everything? What are the skills that I'm lacking? And then what will be the pathway that I will take to invest in the time, the training to gain those skills. And again, it sort of depends, but I think one of the go-to pieces of advice that I'll often talk with people is really thinking about building their own sort of personal advisory board, to really think about their careers. And that advisory board can help them sort of navigate the day-to-day of their current roles and the challenges that they're facing. If they've got this close circle of people that they can go to, again, where you have, they will give you their honest observations, in the most supportive way, that is helpful, because we don't always see our own flaws. We don't always see where what we're not doing as well. It's how do we show up at work? We think we show up in one way, but perhaps we show up in in an entirely different way. And so for me, again, I want people to be able to have those people that they can go to talk through their ideas, to talk through their challenges, to talk through their hopes, and that, in many ways, also they sort of arrive at their own conclusions, and it becomes more clear to them that the next steps for them to do, or things they should invest in doing for themselves, are 1, 2, 3, in order to be able to continue to progress and be successful in their careers.
This idea of an advisory board is brilliant, right? You're basically you're building your own 360-degree feedback system, right? In your own life. And I suppose if you had to take a breakout, right? I know in my life, working independently, Peter is probably one of the closest I have in my advisory board, since we work so closely together, work in the same space. But where else would we pull from for an advisory board, right? Is it family? Is it friends? Is it former colleagues? Is it existing colleagues? Do we invite those people in that we're currently working with? Considering, you did mention people being able to give us insights on how we're actually showing up at work, or is that a little bit too close to home? So what have you seen work from in the process of building an effective advisory board, and how many people typically would you put on that board?
I'll start with the second part of that question. I'm probably thinking of about 5 or 6 at most. I think that is sufficient. And then the first part of the question, I suppose it depends, but I would start with the immediate work circle as well too. And again, that just depends on the type of organizational culture that is there. Like, does it exist? And for some people, it, even in the same organization, it can, and for others, it can't. I think it depends, even almost down to the departmental culture itself. What does that look like? How is feedback received? Both up and down. Can you? And I have seen it be really great, and I have seen it be really, really bad as well for people. So, like, you shouldn't be afraid to be, you shouldn't be afraid to be able to have these conversations with the people that you work with. And if you're talking about, hey, long term, my goals are to do 1, 2, 3, 4. I want to be able to, like, those aren't bad conversations. Those are not conversations that should create concern or doubt about a person's commitment to the organization, particularly if you're a manager. I can remember a situation myself in one of my own careers where, the one of the CEO of the company came to me and said, James, I'm really concerned. We're losing a lot of really talented people. Like, why do you think that is? And my answer to him was like, well, one, the organization is bottom heavy, and so it just needs a lot of people to be able to support the machine. So there aren't always places for people to go. But what I saw was this culture of, rather than trying to build people up and acknowledge, hey, isn't it great that, while we're sorry to see Peter leave, we know he's going on to something great, and it's because of his work with us, and we hope that gave him a foundation to be able to take his career to the next level. But what I saw, and I said to the CEO, what I see is this culture where people are, they're trying to almost like force people to be happy and content in a role, and you can't do that. You just can't. So so coming back to your question, Eli, it really just depends on the organization. It can depend on even elements within the organization. For some people, it'll be a safe space. For others, it won't be. Like, my wish for people, particularly as I work with them, is that they have the confidence to speak up, to be able to voice their concerns, to voice their hopes and their ambitions, that they hope that will be well received, but that if it's not being well received, that they're able to also spot some of those telltale signs earlier in the process, so that they're never ambushed at the at the end of the day. And I certainly do not mean to sound like there are so many great companies and so many great organizations. I don't want to think that I have such this negative view that every company is going to, end in disaster. That is not the case at all. But maybe I'm also partly conditioned by what I saw over the years and experienced in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, James, we've unpacked, reflection, learning. We've unpacked a little bit about, building an advisory board, having the courage to have conversations, right? And most often that will start with a direct line manager, right? Not always, but most often, right? what if that reflection process, right, and maybe the feedback loops that you create through an advisory board, and at the end of the day, or at some point in the process, you realize, like, wow, this really isn't a good fit for me. This organization, this team, maybe it's burnout, maybe it's overwhelm, right? How would you suggest, or what have you seen in terms of people self-diagnosing, right? Because sometimes when we're in overwhelm, it's not always easy to see that we're actually burned out. We're just overwhelmed, right? But because of the sense of overwhelm, we've got blinders on to what is going on. So, yeah, self-diagnosing, I guess, is question number one. And question number two, how does one take the first steps, the small steps that you talked about, towards realignment?
Great question.
It's a big question, I know, but
it is. So, well, if we take the self-reflection piece, actually, I'm going to take this in another direction. I earlier this year had met someone who, out in the West Coast, working with a tech company, not Facebook, but like, again, mid-career level, very accomplished, and loved her work, loved the team in so many ways, but there was a change in leadership, and it was a disaster for her. She, at every turn, she felt like she was failing. Every feedback piece of feedback that she got was, oh, you didn't do this well enough. This is not good enough, or this is wrong. And despite sort of working, cross-functionally and with different departments, having great feedback from other people. So she struggles with, like, I don't know how to reconcile this. I don't know, what I'm doing wrong. And I think that's a fair, comment. I think it's oftentimes, like, I think it's probably the natural go-to that we would all have in that situation. I'll go, well, what is it that I am doing wrong? Like, I don't seem to do anything right. I'm not being told what it is I need to do differently. I'm just being told that it is not good enough. So, over a period of time, that can lead to the voice of your inner critic, the saboteur, just like, actually, where you actually really buy into that. Like, maybe I'm not good enough anymore. Like, maybe just something is wrong. I think intellectually, she knew that it wasn't her, but we would meet on a weekly basis, and just talk through the scenario of the week and what had happened. We would talk through, okay, you need to go and address this. Like, how do you think you might want to approach this? Like, what is the ultimate message you want to be able to give back? Let's even, role play how that conversation might go. So eventually she got to a place of recognizing, okay, this is definitely not me. Still stuck it out. Part of that was, I get paid really, really well. Okay, great. I've got stock in this company. If I leave, I will lose that. So then it came to a place where, okay, that's choice. And is that a trade-off you're willing to continue to make long term? And so it comes back to coming back to those values and those motivators. What is truly important for you? Like, how is this environment affecting your both your physical and your mental well-being? It has a toll. That kind of toxicity or negative environment ultimately can harm us. And so she got to a place where eventually she was able to give herself the permission to engage in a whole new job search and looking to find an exit and to find an opportunity. So I suppose, Peter, if I'm answering your question, it's that self-reflection element of all of that. I suppose that there's so many components to that, right? There's a number of stages in all of that. Like, first of all, it's okay, really reflecting on, like, is it me? Am I doing something wrong? And finding an answer to that particular question. Then thinking, the next stage of that is, okay, what can I do about it? Like, how can this change? Like, what does change look like? And, to me, it's a simple choice of, I can either accept it and hope that something will change, or I will need to change. Like, I will need to move on. You can't force anybody to arrive at those conclusions. And I'm certainly not going to tell anybody whatever my instincts might be. I'm there to help them. I'm there to sort of brainstorm, to guide them to a process where they're realizing they're realizing what the actual answer to those problems are themselves and what they need to do, and then hopefully work with them to figure out, okay, let's talk about next steps. Let's talk about what would the new world look like. Is it the same values, just the element of perhaps a toxic manager or a bad manager needs to change, or has something changed also with you over time, which is inevitable. I think the values that we started out with in the early parts of our career, well, some of that is sort of hardwired and coded into us. There are certain trade-offs that we're more willing to make later on.
You know what Eli, I don't know what your thoughts are about this, but I think what struck me as really useful on the question was about self-diagnosis, right? And when we are under that type of stress, it can be confusing to self-diagnose. But what you brought up was that she was having conversations with you as her coach, right? And this might sound a bit self-serving since we're all coaches, but having a coach of some sort, whether it's a formal arrangement or whether it's an informal coach, right? And I think maybe going back to the advisory board, if you have trusting relationships with individuals in your advisory board and really asking them to play a listening role and allow you to talk and share what's going on, and especially if members of the board are maybe more experienced, more advanced in their careers, who have more seasoned insights to share. That could be another massive value of having that board there in the first place.
Yeah. I feel for your client or this individual, right? It's an all too common scenario where, I might get a little passionate here. So where
go, Eli, go.
I think we've all had strong words, and I met this person by total serendipity, but I could see like instantly the struggle that she was having. So I was like, let me work with you. Let me just give you some time. And we met, we probably met over the course of 5 months. Not always every week, but in the beginning, yes, as we navigated certain challenges. But it's she empowered herself, and that's what you want. Like, she was able to really reflect on all of this, understand what was important to her, understand what could she let go. Like, I don't really care about those stock options anymore. You know what? I will happily trade those off for a much better environment, for a more fulfilling place to be. And there's greater job satisfaction. How do you put a price on that?
Yeah, you really can't. I think, like, the one piece of advice that I would want someone to take right now, so they don't find themselves in this situation, is to understand that in general, in an environment where you feel like maybe I'm doing something wrong, or you keep getting corrected might even feel like you're being chastised to a certain extent, relating to the work that you're doing. It's not good enough. And it gets to a point where as humans, we do turn this around on ourselves, and then it does start to affect the way we feel about who we are. But we have to try our best to remember that when other people are coming at us over and over again, and it feels like a bit of a pattern, that there is something that they see within us that they don't like about themselves that they are attacking us about, right? And that in itself, if you feel like you're being attacked at work and you can't really see or justify the reason why this person is acting or reacting actually in that way, or being so triggered around you, I think it's really important to just check yourself and say, oh, like, this person has some unhealed stuff that they're actively dealing with internally, and they're just taking it out on me, right? And hopefully we can understand that we have innate strengths. So all that self-reflection will support the individual in really digging back into their strengths. And if they feel comfortable, and I don't know how anyone can feel comfortable in an environment like that, right? I have plenty of clients who are actively dealing with similar situations where they're in a pretty toxic work environment and there is zero psychological safety. So even bridging the conversation with someone is so triggering and gets them so scared that it's just easier to just say, I don't want to do that, and I'd rather just leave, right? But I don't know. It's always helped me understand when people are acting out and just kind of giving some very harsh criticisms, and it almost feels reactive or coming from a place where they're feeling triggered, to just remember that it's probably something that they're feeling inside of them, and it's not actually anything that we did to create that. It's their perception of a reality that they want to see.
That's a superb reminder. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it comes back to sort of that common question that I'll often ask when I'm encountering these situations, like, okay, what's the actual problem here? Like, what's actually going on, behind the scenes that is perhaps causing this particular behavior or response?
Yeah.
James, I'm just curious if you have any other advice that, in preparation for our conversation today, right, that you wanted to make sure you imparted to our viewers, our listeners today on this topic of self-awareness and learning and professional development and whatnot.
Well, if I think of being able to go in and create a safe space to be able to, have honest conversations, to be able to give feedback. I think people are naturally nervous, and I can understand that. So part of it is to be able to ask, like, is it okay? Can I give some feedback? I'm thinking if you're reporting up, right?
Yeah.
I guess it sort of works
both ways. I think it works both ways for sure.
No, for sure. I think there is. Asking if it is okay to give feedback. I think you have to create a culture, and this also going both ways is, how do you get into a habit of being able to give feedback on a regular basis, like sharing thoughts, sharing observations, as opposed to the sort of year-end annual performance review, which is really not helpful to anybody. I think if you're nervous about going into and having a bigger conversation, think about, okay, if you have a laundry list, maybe you just focus on 3 things, just to kickstart, so it doesn't become a complete, almost assault on someone. That is part of it. And I just had another thought as well too that I just sort of blanked. It'll come back to me. Well, I guess, this, as this is particularly if you're as a manager, then I feel there's a responsibility as a manager to be able to create that environment, to create that culture where, hey, it is okay to come to me. I'm going to invite feedback. I want you to be able to share. I think that the comment I was going to make was, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, is sometimes just letting something fester a little bit. You know, it's like, okay, maybe it's not such a big deal. Maybe I don't need to make a big deal out of it. But honestly, if something is bothering you, it's a big deal. And if you don't address it, again, you got to find the right way and an appropriate way to address it. But if you don't address that concern, it becomes a bigger deal, or it just adds to other issues, or you're likely to, you know, okay, well, that's not a big deal either. I'll just shelve that one. And so then it's the sum of so much that creates a larger problem. So I guess that's sort of the, you know, advice I would want people to walk away with, is find ways to be able to share like small concerns, little concerns, so they're not an issue. Find the, you know, if you're unsure how to approach that person, like find somebody else that you can say, hey, can I soundboard something out with you? I want to be able to talk this out. Like, if I say it this way, how would you receive that? Would you see it as a shared observation? Would you understand why I was concerned in the moment? Or would you see it as like some attack on your, either your leadership or your work, whatever that would be?
Yeah, that's brilliant advice. There's this framework that I was taught not too long ago called a clearing conversation. When giving feedback, permission is one of the key pieces for sure. And then you would go in, and with that individual, after you've gotten their permission to share some feedback, you'd share a little bit about the general situation that has been happening lately. And then you go into the story that you've been telling yourself as a cause of that situation, right? But really focusing on the I side. Like, I feel that X, Y, and Z has, you know, really exacerbated things, or whatever it may be, right? And then you give a few examples of patterns where this has arisen, and then you give the space for the other person to share their perspective. And in that, you can really avoid a lot of feelings of attack, right? Especially if you're really surrounding everything with I messaging, or I feel messaging rather. So that way there's not that defensive you language. Well, you know, you do this, you do that, or, you know, things of that nature. And you know, in doing that, it creates a space to let the individual know how you're feeling, and hopefully that will diffuse the situation. Like, oh wow, I didn't know I was making you feel that way. Because one thing that we oftentimes get wrong is that we assume the other person understands what it is that's going through our head, and they just don't. Thank God, because it would be terrible to be around a bunch of mind readers. But you know, and alternatively, it's like we think that that's what's happening. I mean, I've been there, right? I'm like, how do they not see this? This is BS, you know? And then you just start getting all worked up, and then you fester, and then the stuff piles up, right? And just like you said, James, it's exhausting, and it can cause you to just totally explode or implode sometimes, right? You implode on yourself, and you just don't know what to do anymore. So it's, yeah, that's brilliant advice. Always launch by asking for permission.
Yeah. I love the terminology of clearing conversation. So I really like that. It's just
oh, it's Googleable. So Googleable, a new word.
You just made up a word.
Oh, I'm sure it's yeah, Googling.
But even in some ways, if you take that mindset of, you know, I could see how that would be more helpful or more empowering for somebody, as opposed to the fear of, I need to go give them feedback. Like, there's even just the use of that word itself. It you know, it can almost, it can instill a certain amount of fear, or you fear like you feel potentially that you're going into the feedback could create problems. Whereas a clearing conversation is just like, hey, let's just address this. Let me talk about this. So I like that, and it's a conversation.
Yeah, that's just it. Doesn't, but you know, it's tough when someone hasn't created the space for psychological safety. It's tough to like jump in and have a hard conversation with that person. I mean, you know, but if it helps, try this at home. Try it with a family member that's been getting on your nerves lately, a sibling, a cousin, a parent, a grandparent, right?
A sister-in-law. I'm not projecting.
Is she watching right now, James?
Well, I know James has a couple of dogs, so he can practice with his dogs.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, look, gents, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up for today? We're nearing the top of the hour. This has been a super insightful conversation. I always learn something new from both of you guys. Thanks, James, for making the time, for finding the time to be with us today. I'm super curious about whatever that is peeking over your right shoulder.
That's Larry the llama.
Yeah, Larry the llama. Okay, well, you can practice with Larry the llama.
Yeah, the dogs like it. They cuddle up to him. So
that's just very cute.
Yeah, super appreciative of your time and your insights and your experience and your wisdom. And Eli, always love having a conversation with you. It always unfolds in powerful ways. So thanks, man.
Heck yeah, man. Right back at you, Peter Hill, asking the big questions. So thank you all. Thank you, James.
Thank you both.
For everyone that tuned in, you'll be able to catch this playback live anytime on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. And, stay tuned because we'll be back in just a few weeks with another episode of Breaking Bad Careers, where we will help you figure out how to find more meaning, uncover, and reflect more effectively so you can actively and intentionally make the moves required to get you back on your meaningful career path. So thank you so much, gents. You have a lovely rest of your day, Peter. A good night, James. And we'll see everyone else in a few weeks.
Appreciate it, guys. Take care.
Have a great night, everyone. Thank you.